Our guest today is Dalia Hatuqa, a multimedia journalist specializing in Israeli-Palestinian affairs and regional Middle East issues as they pertain to business and economics, culture, art, and U.S. foreign policy in the region. She joins us today from Amman. Dalia, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
As a journalist covering Palestinian-Israeli issues, the 76-year-long conflict and the current war following Hamas's attacks on October 7th, how do you see, from your journalistic lens, how do you see the coverage of the war being different or the same in the various outlets that you have access to, whether it's Western media, Arab media, specifically Palestinian media, as well as Israeli media?
Basically, I mean, I cover I cover Israel Palestine mostly for U.S. media outlets, but obviously this involves and it includes looking into Palestinian and Israeli media and how they've been covering the war since October 7th. I'll get to that in a second, but I think there's been an emphasis on the way the Western media has covered it. Namely in this case, I would say the American media and the British media. I'll focus on the American media because that's the one that I work most with. And I'll talk a little bit about the parallel between that and what's happening on the ground. So in Palestine, what we're seeing right now in Palestinian media, so to speak, is we're seeing the unvarnished reality of what's happening. So we're seeing the brutality, the horrificness. We're seeing things that honestly I haven't personally seen since the second Intifada in 2000. And it's nothing like the sanitized, I would say, I would call it the sanitized Western media, which some would argue is in a way serving as an arm of the Israeli state, because I have noticed that there's constantly this echoing of the Israeli government and the military claims without actually reporting them out themselves, which is a problem in itself. A good example of this, I mean, I would say that the Israeli authorities haven't exactly had a track record in truth. They've been caught lying about the so-called command center at Al Shifa Hospital, the 40 beheaded babies, and even the flower massacre. To look more deeply at the issue, I would even venture into the issue of language. So when so much of the journalistic grammar that is being used, using the passive voice, not identifying the culprit, things of that nature, that shows that the grammar is leaning towards deferring to those who are already in power, rather than those seeking to challenge that power. And when you do that, the people who are stateless or people who are being harmed, they're already being sidelined or dehumanized before they even reach the starting line. So there are simple things like grammar that actually make a whole lot of difference. For example, like I said, the passive voice is used. Editors in big media outlets in the States, I've noticed, and many other journalists have noticed, have gone out of their way to distance the Israeli military and the government from their culpability and responsibility. And when you juxtapose that with what's happening in Ukraine, a good example of this would be, Russian airstrike kills Ukrainians, but it becomes a whodunit when the culprit is Israeli. You just see a headline like Palestinian killed amidst airstrikes, and you don't really know who killed this Palestinian. And there are a lot of examples of things of that nature. I'll stop right here in case you have a follow-up question.
Yeah, this is it's very helpful to see how you look at the language as well. And I know that a very common talking point amongst many Arab leaders has, since the attacks of October 7th, has been, well, this conflict did not start on October 7th. I've talked to many people who are not necessarily part of the policy community in Washington, who also lack the historical knowledge about the conflict. Do you see things improving in that sense? I mean, there's a lot more coverage than there was, before. And do you see a shift in trying to delve deeper into some of these issues? Of course, print is always very different than TV, but at least in the print media, do you see a difference in how this conflict, or at least the historical context, is at least explained?
Unfortunately, what I'm seeing, especially because, I also look at the three major wires that cover this, the Associated Press, Agence France Presse, and Reuters. All three have a habit of identifying the root cause of what happened as being October 7th, the attack on October 7th. And as we, or a lot of us know, this did not start on October 7th. And when the Palestinian narrative is limited to trauma and loss, the media coverage also objectifies their status as an urgent humanitarian cause in the immediate present, rather than caught up in a long-term chronic conflict. So all these things did not just start on October 7th. Even prior to October 7th, we had several hundred Palestinians who had been killed in the West Bank. And these issues were not being covered because, for many reasons, perhaps it's, media fatigue, or, also the dehumanization of Palestinians, I think, plays a role. I think also starting on October 7th limits other discussions of the effects of the war on Palestine's rich political, social, and cultural fabric, which is being destroyed. I mean, in Gaza, especially right now, which is a crucial aspect of the existential violence being pursued against them. So covering a war without introducing its roots to readers is inaccurate, ignoring the fact that there's been a 17-year-old Israeli blockade of the Gaza Strip, or pretending that the Israeli regime has no control over its borders and resources, is insidious. I mean, the fact is that Israel has the capability to block water, food, and electricity, which we have seen. So omitting the decades of colonial violence is also a problem, as for the refusal to acknowledge that 70% of the Palestinians in Gaza hail from the lands where many Israeli towns now stand. And it's very hard to sort of explain to people, that erasing this history and erasing this fact is very much a part of what's been happening since October.
And this is one of the points that I very often mention with regards to how people in the region are essentially watching a different war, and that their day-to-day news consumption pre-October 7th always included headlines about what's happening in the Palestinian territories, whether it's in the West Bank or Gaza, but particularly the West Bank in 2023, because it is recorded pre-October 7th as the deadliest year for Palestinians since the Intifada. And so How do you see Israeli and Arab coverage also differ in the way that they are covering current events, particularly the war? There's always finger pointing at Al Jazeera and others, but particularly at Al Jazeera for overdoing it in just broadcasting from Gaza, from the scene of the war, and the framing of you talked about language, but the framing of the issues as well. So how do you see that difference with also the way that Israeli media is covering this?
Yeah. I think that Israeli media has rarely presented its audiences with such a uniformly patriotic vision of reality as they have since October. Yes, they do go after politicians. So politicians do face heavy criticism, but interrogations of the military, its strategies, its generals, and ordinary troops are muted. In a way, Israeli media is drafted to the main goal of winning the war, or what looks like trying to win the war. So if you want to try to find some similarities, it's kind of along the lines of US media after 9/11. The shock was so brutal and the trauma is so hard that journalists see their role now, or part of their role is to help the state to win the war. And part of it is showing as little as possible from the suffering in Gaza and minimizing criticism about the army. So you see that their coverage of Palestinians is only in the framework of security. You hardly see any women, kids. The spirit is that they're all Hamas. The Israeli media has also normalized acts of extreme brutality. In a way, Palestinians are invisible to Israelis. The stereotyping is painting, almost all Gazans as monsters. There's no difference between them and Hamas. The conditioning is that these people don't deserve empathy. And I think it's important for us to remember, and I literally just got an email about this right now, that there's a military censor in Israel. And we just got something in the email about from the military censor in Israel telling us what we can and cannot talk about. So what goes on in the mainstream media in Israel is also governed or restricted by law to what the military censor allows. So in a way, as far as democracy and the freedom of the press, the context is not very democratic. The Israeli military censors who operate in every TV studio and newsroom have decided to give away very little detail about the progress on the ground. What we're seeing is things that videos that people in Gaza are putting out on social media whenever they have access to the internet, or we're seeing videos being uploaded on Telegram by Hamas or whatnot. But if you look at the IDF in itself, the videos from Gaza, for example, tend to be close cropped and often show only the aftermath of engagement. We often only hear about the death of soldiers days after, let's say, Hamas or other groups have said that they were killed. So there is information available about civilians in Gaza on smaller Israeli outlets, both in Hebrew and English, but people have to seek it out. And I think few have the time, the interest, or the energy. And I think in Israel's particular case, television has been especially influential in shaping Israeli opinion after October 7th, because people follow daily live news broadcasts with a commitment reminiscent of the pre-digital era. And also, I mean, Israelis do have access to videos on social media. Telegram is big, WhatsApp, Instagram. They do show some horrific scenes from Gaza, torture porn, so to speak, where Palestinians are being degraded or humiliated, corpses are being mutilated or urinated on, people being driven over by tanks. It's like the Saw film franchise, only it's real life. And there are a lot of popular Telegram channels that show these things. So again, it's a matter of whether people want to see it or not. But I think overall, the Israeli media seems to be taking on a role of cheerleading for the military, I would say.
And what about Arab media? There have been various accounts that the majority of the Arab population does not have a clear picture of the October 7th attacks, and that basically Arab media did not show footage, or if it did, it showed very little footage of what happened. And of course, there are various media outlets, Western media outlets, that are not allowed into Gaza. And so most of the coverage that we are getting are via local journalists as well as Al Jazeera journalists. How do you see the coverage from the Arab media lens?
I think I would say that Palestinians, in this case, have been watching the situation, being rolled out since October 7th, because we have to remember that Palestinians follow Israeli media diligently. We have experts in Hebrew-speaking media, courtesy of having spent time in Israeli jails, but also in Israeli politics. So Palestinians follow Israeli TV shows. There is, and I've said this before, there's this sort of unrequited love. Israelis maybe could care less about what's going on with Palestinians. They're not as affected. They don't follow Palestinian media like Palestinians consume Israeli media. So I believe that Palestinians have a very good idea of what had happened on October 7th, especially because most of us who woke up to the news that day, as soon as we heard about what happened or read about it, whether in Palestinian media or on Al Jazeera or in the Israeli media, we knew that there would be adverse repercussions to the attack. So I believe that because of the language, because of the interest, because of the power structure between occupied and occupier, Palestinians have a much better idea of what's going on in Israel than the other side. And I think that two main, let's say, entities or outlets have been doing a good job of showing the world what's going on in Gaza. You have Al Jazeera, but you also have just normal people, let's say citizen journalists, who, because these days everybody has a camera on their phone, they are able to show what's happening on the ground. Al Jazeera, Al Jazeera is not a monolith. So Al Jazeera is, you've got the Arabic Al Jazeera and the English Al Jazeera. You've got, AJ Plus, which caters more to a younger audience. I think Al Jazeera English has done a very good job with raising or shedding light on aspects of what's happening in Gaza, but not also that, not just in Gaza, but they've also made it a point to cover, let's say, the hostages, their families, talking to their families directly, covering the war from an Israeli perspective, but also with a context. I mean, they're not gonna just, pretend to be the Times of Israel or whatever. They have their audience as well. Al Jazeera Arabic has a very different way of covering their covering Israel and Palestine. And I think it's a little bit the news on Israel is muted. It's not as detailed, but also it's skewed or more skewed than the other arms of the Al Jazeera network, so to speak.
Lastly, this week, Palestinians across the world commemorated Nakba Day, which falls on May 15th. It's a very solemn anniversary of the forced displacement and the expulsion of Palestinians from their homes in mandatory Palestine at the time. And as, of course, the Arab-Israeli war had begun following Israel declaring its independence in 1948. How do you see coverage of al-Nakba in Western media as a journalist based in the region who's covering these issues primarily for Western and US audiences?
I think some of the larger media outlets in the US, such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, they have covered the Nakba, demonstrations that have taken place or commemorations and whatnot. But as is the case also in Gaza, context is always either missing or it is it's lacking something. It's lacking history, and it's skewed in many ways. I think part of it is, like I said earlier, due to the fact that Palestinians tend to be dehumanized, and the dehumanization has its roots not just in the current trauma, but in a long disengagement from covering Palestinian lives. So there is, I feel like, a willful ignorance and a lack of willingness to hear Palestinian voices for many years, certainly since the Second Intifada, if not dating back to 1948 and the Nakba. I think that it's important to see that a lot of these outlets have other people talking about Palestine, Israel that are not Palestinian. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. There are many people out there who are very, well, how do I phrase it? Who have the background and the knowledge to talk about Palestine. But just as it's important to hear Israeli voices, it's also important to hear Palestinian voices and to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, because in a way, a lot of not just the news, but like panels, by policy organizations and whatnot, like you see a lack of representation by Palestinians. And I think that is part of the problem. And that's why with the Nakba itself, we did see, a lot of coverage, but again, the coverage was came from a more pro-Israel point of view, and the history itself, you feel like it's very bare, and it doesn't go into the depth of what really happened, not just in 1948, but prior to 1948, because this also happened, several years before, the war itself in 1948.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights on the coverage of the current ongoing war and the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and we hope to continue the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.